Black Panther Wakanda Forever is exactly the movie it needs to be. An honoring of the legacy and impact of Chadwick Boseman and a beautiful journey of grief and healing, not only for the main characters of the film, but also for the audience as a whole. Marvel is back to true form with this film and reminds us just how powerful and touching a superhero film can be. This film is the best Marvel movie of this year and one that I highly encourage everyone to watch. Hi, I'm Imran and you're watching Imran Plus, and welcome to my spoiler discussion of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. As I mentioned, this film is a triumph both in terms of its narrative arc as well as its development for its main characters, in particular Ramonda and Shuri. This film is about grieving, and the acceptance of grief, particularly for our main character Shuri, who is dealing with not just one loss of her brother, but also the eventual loss of her mother Ramonda. What makes this film truly beautiful and special is not only the fact that it highlights how to process grief and the struggle with sometimes processing grief, and how sometimes we lose ourselves in other things like hobbies or work or chores and tasks that really have no meaning at the end of the day, in order to avoid facing the hard truth of accepting the loss of a loved one. However, this film also showcases the beauty of the circle of life, and that life comes with loss and also new beginnings. And this film highlights that beautifully by beginning with a loss of Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa and then ending with the birth or introduction of his son, T'Challa Jr. Ryan Coogler has accomplished the impossible feat of trying to match the high standards set by the first Black Panther film, especially with the additional challenges and hardships of dealing with such a tragic loss of Chadwick Boseman. Ryan Coogler rises to the occasion with this film and does exactly what needs to be done in honoring and paying tribute to T'Challa and Chadwick Boseman's impact, while also moving forward with the story and continuing to develop these characters. He takes us on a journey not only through Wakanda, but also through the psyche and minds of these characters that are truly suffering with an unexpected and unsurmountable loss, just as the real world did when we all heard about Chadwick Boseman's tragic passing. And Ryan geniusly incorporates the true story of how Chadwick Boseman passes in this film, with T'Challa dying of a mysterious illness. And what makes it even more tragic is that Shuri was working so hard to try and save her brother. And this theme of trying to use technology and being so reliant on technology and modernization in the future is a theme that I think is very brilliantly interwoven throughout this entire film, and will also be touched upon in the Ironheart Disney Plus series. Let's talk a little bit about the parallels in this movie. Our first one is our return to Wakanda, which directly parallels our introduction to Wakanda in Black Panther, when T'Challa and Nakia are flying in on a jet to Wakanda driven by Okoye. And in this film, we have Queen Ramonda flying into Wakanda with a jet piloted by Okoye. And the same lines are used and the same visual imagery is depicted as we enter Wakanda through the force field, and it's just a great callback. In the first film we were introduced to Wakanda, and in this film we're returning, but this time we're returning with some loss and a feeling that something is missing, and that of course is Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa, and that kind of sets the tone for this film. Speaking of T'Challa, we have another parallel at the United Nations. In the end of the first film, we end with T'Challa speaking at the UN and announcing that Wakanda would be opening its borders to the rest of the world. And this film opens with Queen Ramonda arriving at the UN to defend Wakanda from other people and the rest of the world trying to infiltrate and get access to their resources. And so that's a really interesting commentary that Ryan Coogler has very quickly placed in this film, and used the imagery of the end of the first film and the beginning of this film to create a through line through. And I think that is very well done and is consistent throughout this film. In Captain America's Civil War, we were introduced to the Black Panther. And in that film, we got an idea of the type of leader and warrior that T'Challa is, with him having mercy on Baron Zemo despite being angered and filled with a desire for revenge and vengeance for the death of his father. And we have that exact scene paralleled at the end of this film, with Shuri facing off Namor. And both Namor and Baron Zemo find themselves in a very close to death situation with nothing standing between them other than the Black Panther. In this film, Shuri has to make a decision about what type of Black Panther she's going to be. Is she going to be as noble as her brother, as Killmonger suggests, or is she going to get the job done like Killmonger would have? And she's grappling with that same decision, just as the way T'Challa grappled with the decision in Civil War. And ultimately, T'Challa chose to have mercy on Baron Zemo because this was not his battle specifically. Baron Zemo was accountable to many other people for his crimes, and that's why he needed to stay alive, and so that justice could be delivered. And in this film, Shuri makes the ultimate decision to have mercy on Namor because she sees that he is a leader responsible for a group of people just as the way T'Challa once was and just the way that she is now. And speaking of leaders, there is a parallel between the leader of Wakanda and the leader of Talokan, Namor versus the Black Panther, or in this case Shuri, and in the first movie T'Challa. Both are leaders of a group of people that are secluded from the rest of the world and are protected amongst themselves and in community with themselves and themselves only. And in this film, we see a Wakanda that has opened its borders and is navigating in a different space than it was in the first movie. But Talokan is the way Wakanda was in the first movie. It's still very private, it's still keeping to itself, and it's only reaching out to Wakanda because it needs help. And so we have a parallel between these two very advanced and royal civilizations, which I think is a fascinating comparison, especially when you look at the leaders of each of these nations. Both Namor and the Black Panther, either Shuri or T'Challa, have faced a lot of loss, and Namor actually says the line that only the most broken people make the best of leaders. And that seems to be true because we see now that Shuri is the most broken that she's ever been, and she has to lead her people in coming to peace with Talokan and Namor's people. Another parallel that I found fascinating in this film was the heart-shaped herb, recreating that and consuming that with Killmonger's destruction and consummation of the heart-shaped herb. Shuri is very different than T'Challa in that she does not buy into or believe in the traditions of Wakanda and the culture and practices and rituals the way that T'Challa or even her mother did. Even Nakia believes in them more than she does. This reflects the same type of ideology and approach that Killmonger had to Wakandan culture, tradition, and rituals. He was very skeptical of them and only saw them as a tool that he could use in order to meet his goals. In the same way, Shuri views these rituals and these traditions as a tool, similar to the rest of her technology, which is a larger theme throughout this film. Shuri is very focused on using tools and her talents and science and technology in order to get things done. She doesn't believe in the spiritual or the traditional, and that's why it's so hard for her to heal. In the same way that it was so hard for Killmonger to heal over the loss of his father and the abandonment by Wakanda. So we have very similar characters between Shuri and Killmonger, and in some ways Shuri is a middle ground between T'Challa and Killmonger. That was kind of introduced in the first movie, and we've really developed that very well in this film. So Ryan Coogler clearly has a direction that he's taking Shuri in, and it is very interesting to watch. And lastly, of course, the one parallel that you might have seen even in the trailers is Riri Williams making her Iron Man suit. And the iconic initial shot of Tony Stark pounding the hammer on that metal. In the same way, Riri Williams built her suit in the shape of a heart on her breastplate. We'll explore more of Riri Williams' past and future in the Ironheart series, but this was a great introduction to the character and a way to compare her to Tony Stark without outright making that line. Ryan Coogler made some subtle connections with Riri Williams being an MIT student. She might be a recipient of one of Tony Stark's grants, but she builds her suit in the same exact way that that Tony Stark built his suit, and so I'm curious to see how those parallels continue in the future. We have a heavy emphasis on technology in this film, with AI being reintroduced into the MCU, and I'm curious to see how that bodes for the future of the MCU, specifically with Iron Man and potentially a Tony Stark AI. We briefly talked about Namor and Talokan, but let's talk a little bit more about what makes them so incredible to behold. Namor and Talokan are just as beautifully and brilliantly realized as Wakanda was in the first Black Panther film. Ryan Coogler and his team have put incredible thought and dedication into creating a rich and diverse culture at the heart of Talokan. Of course, it's based on Mayan and Aztec civilization, but the story of how Talokan was born as a way to escape persecution and death and colonization is really powerful, and in some ways contrasts with Wakanda stepping out and not having a role in any of those types of pursuits in the real world, which Killmonger was upset about in the first movie. In this film, Namor gets his name by being called El Niño Sin Amor, the child without love. And I think that that is a beautiful origin because it really paints his character with a lot of pain and loss and suffering. He has nothing to lose other than his people, and so he will fight tooth and nail to protect them. Namor himself is heavily based on Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent or plum serpent that is very present in Mesoamerican culture. In fact, his headdress is a direct representation of that creature. And you'll also find that a lot of Aztec art has the same exact hand motions that Talokan uses to greet each other. I found Talokan to be well realized and a formidable force, especially for Wakanda. They truly seem to be pure civilizations that were capable of being allies or their own worst enemies. Talokan and Namor also are attributed to the classic mythological tale of mermaids and mer people, and sirens specifically. In fact, it's Talokans who are responsible for the siren songs that are present in many legends of sailors jumping to their deaths at sea because they were mesmerized by beautiful voices coming from the ocean. And I thought that that was very well realized as a tool for Talokans to use to defeat their opponents on ships and boats. It was also very clever to link both Talokan and Wakanda through vibranium, in that the vibranium meteor that landed on Earth so many years ago naturally fell not only on Wakanda but also in the ocean, and that is where Namor and the Talokans get their abilities and powers and what their civilization is based on. And so in that sense, Talokan is a direct comparison to Wakanda in that they are essentially the same type of civilization. They are both very advanced, both have a strong pride in their culture and in their people, and that's what makes them so powerful and formidable. And it's interesting to contrast Wakanda and Talokan, who both have strong cultures and histories, with the United States, who is ever present in the background as the real enemy and as a threat to both of these civilizations, just as they were a threat to them in the past. The United States has a long and brutal history of colonization and oppression. It's interesting that we have two civilizations of color, and the United States and the rest of the world, the developed Western world, is after the resources of these two countries. A very direct comparison to actual history of civilizations being plundered and pillaged for their resources. Once again, this film, just like the first Black Panther, has a lot of commentary on politics and history. Much of it is largely true, and I think that that is the brilliance that Ryan Coogler and his team bring to this film, which makes Wakanda Forever rise above just a simple Marvel movie with action. Let's return to Wakanda and talk a little bit more about Wakandan characters. Queen Ramonda is incredible in this film. Angela Bassett delivers an amazing performance, something that many people feel she should get recognized for at the Oscars, and I would agree with that. Her line reading is powerful, emotional, and so rich and layered. It transcends a character. The most powerful scene with Queen Ramonda was when she fires Okoye for her mistake, her fatal mistake of taking Shuri on her mission to bring Riri to Wakanda. That scene channels so much anger, hurt, pain, and loss. Although Okoye expresses that she has given everything to this throne and sacrificed everything, Queen Ramonda points out that she too has given and lost everything for this throne and for Wakanda. And so that doesn't excuse Okoye's mistake. As for Okoye losing her place as general of the Dora Milaje, this gives us an opening to really explore Okoye as a person. Who is she outside of her role as a Dora Milaje general? Who is she as a person? What drives her, and what is she passionate about now that she has the freedom, you could say, to really be her own person? She's not bound to the throne, and she's not loyal to anybody. What decisions will she make, and will she continue to work with Aneka as a Midnight Angel and perhaps expand outside of Wakanda? Speaking of traveling outside of Wakanda, we were introduced to Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, in this film, which I thought was brilliantly executed. I'm looking forward to exploring Riri Williams' character and the relationship between science and magic or tradition or the supernatural in future Marvel projects. We're gonna potentially explore that with Ironheart, and I'm also interested to explore that with Shuri, who is a very different Black Panther than we've ever seen before. This film was about Shuri's journey dealing with the loss of her brother and now her mother. For a large part of this film, Shuri was not committed to anything. She did not owe anybody anything and was focused on herself and her own feelings of grief and loss. And for that reason, she is driven primarily for a desire for revenge. And that sets her up in a great contrast with Namor, who also is driven by anger and resentment and vengeance for the loss of his people and his mother. And that is what makes him so terrifying as a leader of Talokan, is that he will do anything. And we have Shuri going down the same path. She will do anything for revenge and as an outlet for her anger at the loss of her family. That is what makes that scene in the end of this movie that much more powerful. When Shuri has the chance to take Namor's life, he has nothing left that he can do, and he is at her disposal and at her mercy. And she can deliver the final blow to end Namor and to end this battle. But this is where she needs to make a decision as to what type of person she's going to be. Is she going to take Namor's life and go down a path that she may not return from, of anger and hate and violence? Or will she follow the footsteps of her brother T'Challa and her mother Ramonda, and rising above and having mercy and leading with compassion? And ultimately, Shuri makes a decision that aligns with both her brother and her mother and the rest of her family. And yet she's not the same Black Panther. She still is not on the same path that T'Challa was on. She's on her own path, one that is separated in some senses from Wakanda and Wakandan culture. She is her own person. She believes heavily in her talents in science and in technology. And that is what drives her, rather than Wakandan culture, history, religion, and tradition. And so that is going to be very interesting to follow through the course of the MCU. How does she operate as a Black Panther? And what role will she play on the greater world stage of the MCU against bigger threats that have to bring together the entire planet? Ryan Coogler and the entire cast did an amazing job capturing the heart and emotional journey that all of these characters were on. This is the thesis of this movie. It is a movie to heal, both for the characters and for the audience. We are healing from the loss of Chadwick Boseman, and these characters are healing from the loss of not only their king, T'Challa, but also their queen, Ramonda. And Wakanda is not the same place that it used to be. So much has changed. It now has open borders. People know about it. It has an enemy/ally in Talokan. It has no true leader. It's implied that M'Baku is going to fill the throne, but that is not part of the royal family. And so now we no longer have a royal family. So Wakanda is experiencing a lot of change and evolution. And what does that mean for the identity of Wakanda? Is it compromised? Will it ever return to being the proud, rich culture that it once was? Namor thinks no. Namor believes that Wakanda will need Talokan's help when the rest of the world eventually comes for their resources and destroys what is left of Wakanda, because it is no longer the fortified fortress that it once was. And that is fascinating and brilliantly executed by Ryan Coogler and this entire cast. I love this movie. I think it is so well done. It is exactly the movie that we needed after Black Panther and after the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman. This is the perfect movie to move forward while also honoring what we had in the past and remembering that and channeling that hope and love forward. So that is my spoiler discussion of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I absolutely loved it, but I'm curious to hear what you think. What did you think of this film if you've seen it? Who were your favorite characters? What was your favorite part? And what do you think of Namor and Shuri? And where do you think we'll go next with the world of Black Panther and Wakanda? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time. Lots more videos coming soon, but in the meantime, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Click that bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming videos, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and fellow movie enthusiasts. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.